This is Beyond the Verdict. I'm John Horford with Myrene Cook and our new host, third host, Christina Capron Horford. Welcome to the show officially.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So in our last episode, the Gabby Petito episode, we had referenced the Highway of Tears just because of the location of where she had gone missing, even though obviously it was in the United States and the Highway of Tears is in Canada. North of that, it had just come up, and it came up just because it's one of those areas where a high number of Indigenous women happen to go missing. And Myrene and I were just talking when you went to the bathroom before this. The actual number is believed to be a lot higher than what is stated to be the official number. And it could be even higher than that. And we're not only going to focus on the Highway of Tears, but just sort of the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis in general in the United States, because it really is. There's some shocking statistics affiliated with those types of murders and disappearances. So we're just going to jump into those. I guess I could start us off. One of the more shocking statistics was 40% of women that are trafficked in the United States come from this community. 40, was that right?
Yeah, that stuck with me.
That's what I saw. And I think it may be even higher than that. Those are the numbers that we know of right off the bat. One of the things that I looked at was this Highway of Tears, they said was 750 kilometers. And for those of us here in the United States, I had to do the math on that.
It's like all of us.
It's 466 miles long in Canada, in British Columbia area. And the official version is that there were 18 women that went missing along that stretch of highway. But the locals in the stories that I read said it's more like at least 80 women that go missing along that stretch of road.
Is that 80 total? Is that 80 annually? Is that, like, what are we talking about?
It didn't really say, but it said when the official number was 18, it's more likely to be 80 or higher.
Yeah. So just an insane amount of women going missing. Why do women from these communities tend to go missing more than, other demographics?
I think that's a hard thing to say. Did you guys see that Netflix documentary on, was it called The Highway of Tears?
Mm-mm.
No, we didn't watch. Which one did we watch?
Missing and Murdered in Montana.
Yeah, we watched that one. And I know that they had said some things that I hadn't realized and I wanted to ask you about related to the laws on the reservation. Like, they had cited in that documentary that tribal police aren't allowed to arrest people who aren't a part of the tribe on tribal land.
It depends on the tribal laws. So sometimes they can. So, for example, in some counties where there is tribal land or a casino, for example, and you have tribal officers, they can arrest non-tribal, but generally they are also cross-deputized with the local sheriff's department. And so that may be something that not all places do.
So that might have just been a Montana law then?
It might have been.
And not a Michigan law, because you're saying in Michigan that's not necessarily the case.
Well, because generally they're cross-deputized.
Yep.
So you have a tribal officer who's cross-deputized as a sheriff, and they can do whatever a sheriff could do. So maybe that's the reasoning behind it.
Gotcha.
But in that documentary that I saw, they talked about some reasons they thought that some of the women along that Highway of Tears went missing, and they said a lot of people in their area didn't have their own transportation and they would hitchhike. And they said that was one of the biggest things. People would hitchhike from one town to the next or whatever and then just not be seen again.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. If you're getting into a car with a stranger,
you don't know who you're getting in with, what they're doing, where they're going, any of those things.
And do you think people are intentionally targeting Native, like Indigenous women, because there tends to not be a ton of follow-up or investigation a lot of these disappearances?
It seems to be. In that same documentary I saw, they talked about the fact that the local police don't seem interested when someone goes missing that's Indigenous. versus other things. Like, I think when the Gabby Petito story broke, there was so much media attention from a lot of different areas. And I think a lot of groups who were supporting and trying to help find these missing Indigenous women were a little bit upset because all these others are getting, a lot of media attention and attention from law enforcement, but it didn't seem like their cases were getting the same level.
Yeah, definitely not. I feel like there were so many that they were talking about on that documentary that just never get investigated. They don't do a proper autopsy. And the tribal police definitely were not able to arrest non-tribal people in that one we were watching.
At least in Montana, that may be the case.
Crazy.
It would seem like they should be able to reach out to the local law enforcement, though, if they've developed a suspect they want to arrest.
Right, but then there was some other reason I feel like that they couldn't cross over, so then it would just be like, oh, we can't do anything, and then they just let it go. It seemed like.
Yeah, it did seem like that, because there was another strange law related to that documentary for sure. We should have written it down. We're not doing a very good job at this, Myrene. Another statistic that really stuck out to me was that the National Institute of Justice said that more than 4 out of 5 American Indian or Alaska Native women, which it was 84.3% total, I think, have experienced violence in their lifetime, and 56% said they had experienced sexual violence. That seems extremely high. So what causes that to happen? So all of them, 84? You might as well just say all of them.
It is a lot, and it depends on a lot of different factors. Socioeconomic status can come into play. People may think, I have nowhere to go. If I leave the situation that I'm in, I have nowhere to go. Maybe they do have jobs, maybe they don't. I think a lot of things play into that, but I think one of the biggest things is if they fear law enforcement won't believe or support them, they may not report, and they just kind of stay in that abusive cycle, which is very unfortunate.
So what reasons does law enforcement have to not get involved in these cases?
This says that they have the right to arrest and detain, but they can't prosecute. Or no, they have the right to detain, but they cannot arrest or prosecute non-native individuals for crimes committed on tribal lands unless Congress has explicitly granted power.
So under that theory, then, if, let's say, the tribal police cannot arrest them, they could detain them until maybe that version of the state police or the sheriff's department would get there, if they can get there timely enough, because they probably have a time limit on how long they can detain. A lot of times it's 24 hours, sometimes it's 48, depending on what it is. You would hope law enforcement could get there within that time frame.
Right.
But in some of those really remote areas, I don't know how staffed some of those departments might be.
Right.
And that was one of the things, too, in the Netflix documentary is this mom, her daughter had gone missing 25 years ago, and they have a vigil every year to remember her, to generate interest and support. And she said that she tries to go every week to the local law enforcement agency, and she said either the door is locked, she can't get in, they're not there, or they're only there part-time. And so I would think resources would be pretty scarce if you have a part-time PD in a very large remote area, and trying to cover all those miles would be difficult. And in some of those cases, they called in the FBI, and the FBI is working on those cases, but the hard part is those cases have gone cold, and it's been very difficult to find any new leads.
So you think it's a resource issue?
I think that's part of it, not all of it.
Yeah, I remember them mentioning that the amount of space for the reservation versus how many officers they had was way understaffed.
I mean, even for a traditional police department out in an area like
for
that,
the amount of space that they
super difficult. So do you think that it's individuals choosing to live in these areas that are intending to commit these types of crimes?
I don't necessarily think it's locals. On the Highway of Tears, I think it's people who pick up those women who are walking, hitchhiking, or whatever else.
In that case, but
in those circumstances, but that happens a lot.
Yeah, in those cases. But but even like in a random like remote area of like Montana or New Mexico or, you know, wherever these, you know, cases happen to be. I have a list of like the states where it happens most and stuff like that we can talk about. But are people just like choosing to, I don't, and I'm just trying to wrap my mind around why the violence like against these, or this demographic of people is so much higher.
They're more vulnerable. Police don't investigate it as much, or
I know, but then it's like, but why don't the police investigate it as much? Because like I get it if it is more in the rural areas, but then California is also on the list. New York is also on the list. Like those are places where you would expect. I mean, of course, there are small towns in both those places, but it just seems so strange. Like it feels like they're almost being targeted because people know that they might be able to get away with it.
Well, that could be part of it too. You know, I think a lot of criminals are opportunistic, and they look to see, you know, if I'm going to do something to you, are you going to report it? Yes or no? You know, and so they will kind of have a cost risk benefit analysis, if you will. They'll weigh the options and the factors to see if whether or not, you know, someone might report, or are they likely to have someone who's going to come looking for them? I mean, that could be another thing too. A lot of these areas in the documentary I saw were young ladies who were working at truck stops or diners along this highway route, and you get people coming and going left and right, and if they think maybe, hey, you know what, if I take you to this town I'm from and it's bigger, you'll get a better waitressing job, you'll make more money, or I'll hook you up with someone I know in modeling or whatever it may be. If they're looking for a way out, then maybe they're doing that too.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about the support system too, because in the documentary that we had watched, they talked about the three women, Henny Scott, because Sarah Stops Pretty Places, and Selena Not Afraid. They seem to have family that was very worried and very concerned about their disappearances, and in some cases even seemed to have like standing. One of them was like the granddaughter of like the chief and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily always obviously a situation where they don't have like family or support system. Like even people that, and they were all said to be like, you know, smart, motivated, you know, didn't really back down to people. Like everyone had like literally made comments about how they would like not put up with bullshit basically. So not typically the type of person, like, I feel like criminals are looking for someone who's kind of like weak or reserved.
Well, they were also like 14, 15 years old, wasn't she? They were young.
Yeah, they might have been that young. I can't remember the ages exactly. But
so, I mean, you could
I guess
talk big game, but
I know, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of criminals go after specific types of people, and like people with strong personalities. Typically, I feel like would be avoided.
Well, they're going to avoid people with strong personalities who might fight back, who might speak out, who might do a lot of different things.
Exactly.
And not put up with BS. And I think, you know, if you're 14, 15 and you want a different life, even if you're in your early 20s and you want a different life, you may believe something that somebody tells you, hey, I'll take you to this other place in California or wherever I'm headed. Maybe it's a better route, a better life, whatever. And then they fall into this trap. The one thing they did say too is, and I think this goes across the board, across all demographics, is those who get involved in drug use and become addicts will resort to other types of crime, or they may become prostitutes in some cases, or they may just not have the means to get themselves out of that circumstance. And so I think that can be hard too. From a law enforcement perspective, if you look at some of these cases, if they don't find the bodies right away, you have someone who's missing. So where do you start investigating? You investigate where they were last seen or who they were last with. But if it's a circumstance where you don't know all those details, what do you investigate next?
I thought it was also interesting, just in general, it made me think of when someone goes missing and you call the police, and the police are usually like, oh, they probably ran away, we'll wait 48 hours. But then there's the shows that are like the most crucial time is the first 48 hours.
48, yeah.
So why are we waiting when it's like, and then they're usually, well, I guess not dead that fast, but then they turn up dead.
Is that like a lack of influence that they have? Like sometimes certain people can get that message across where other people can't. Like certain people will go to the police station and say, and can just come across to someone like, hey, this needs to be done, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, they seem credible. Like, I believe this person. Like, we should get right on it. Versus, just wait 48 hours. The kid will probably, like, come and show up. Like, it's not related to this, but it's one of those weird things. Like, today at the program, there's like this massive event at the football field. So there are, like, hundreds of cars coming out. So the police blocked off the entrance. And then some people who work at the program tried to get the police to let people who are coming to the program working, trying to get there through. And the police were kind of like, you're going to have to wait. And then I literally went down there and talked to them, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll clear out this area. Like, we'll just get them through. Like, does it matter, like, who's, like, saying this for, like, police to listen? It's weird. And I know it's not related, but it was just one of those things where I was like, why would they not listen when...
What's the actual law on that?
When they had asked before. When
you get a missing persons report, when are you supposed to, like, immediately start investigating?
Not necessarily, and I don't know specifically the law time frame on it. I know a lot of places will wait some time, and everyone always seems to think it's 48 hours. To be honest with you, I'm not sure, so I don't want to say the wrong amount of numbers. But John, I think you have a point. I do think depending on who's saying or who's asking for something, people may listen, and that's across the board. I mean, if you think about it in your jobs, you know, if a certain person asks for it, you may get it, right? Or if an attorney wants something done, a lot of times that will happen too, right? But it shouldn't be that way. It should be whoever needs the help, whoever needs something done, whoever has a crime, it should all be treated the same. So
is it just because they think people are being like, you're hysterical, you're frantic? Another thing that's not related to this directly that this made me think of, it's like the statistics that you see when a woman goes to a doctor and is saying that, oh, I feel like, you know, there's something, like I'm feeling this pain in my head, or, you know, I feel like something's off. And they're like, you're just being dramatic. And then they end up actually being sick. And there are actual statistics to show that doctors have a tendency to not necessarily believe women as often when they're saying that they have specific symptoms. I feel like it's within that same vein for some. It's just one of those weird things, like, how do we make the decision to believe who we believe?
And right. I think that's hard because it depends on what the person's core values are, but it also depends on what their job is sometimes. I can tell you, you know, I found a doctor that I really, really like because he does listen, but I've fired plenty of them before that because they didn't listen to me. And I'm like, you know what? If you're not going to pay attention to what I'm telling you, you're done. Yeah.
You're like, I'm not going to become a statistic because you're a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah. So it's just one of those things where it's just, how do you change that in society? Like, does it matter, like, the context? Is it, like, is that the only thing that matters? Is it an existing relationship? Is it the individuals, like, standing in the public? And then how do you overcome those barriers and make a system that's more equitable? Because, like you're saying, it's like, okay, the first 48 hours are the most, like, crucial. And it's like, okay, but it seems like a kid who went out partying. Let's give it 48 hours, right. And then we'll start searching. And it's like, it might be too late by then.
Right.
So how do we fix this?
You know, I think there's been some increases in awareness over time. You know, Amber Alerts didn't used to be a thing until it became a thing and became a problem, right? And
they have their own version of Amber Alerts.
Exactly.
The turquoise alerts.
It's something like that.
Was it? No, I need to find it.
Now you need to look it up.
I need to look it up.
But those types of things did bring awareness to it and making sure people are looking out right away. Because, again, if it's a kidnapping type case and someone's taken off with you and there's a highway nearby, you know, that's crazy. And that was one of the things I looked at, too, in statistics. It said that people are often kidnapped from areas for human trafficking in areas closest to expressways. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because there's a quick getaway. Mm-hmm. It's hard to catch up to them.
Yeah. Isn't Michigan one of the top areas in the country for...
Unfortunately, it is.
Human trafficking?
Yeah.
Why?
Close to Canada, right?
Really?
Yeah. I don't know the reason why, but I saw that statistic too.
Yeah. Turquoise alert.
And so how do those work? Does it go through law enforcement?
A notification system for missing Indigenous people that operates similarly to Amber Alerts for children. It's designed to rapidly disseminate information to the public to help locate and retrieve missing individuals, particularly those who may be at risk due to their age, health, or circumstances. The system is triggered when a person is identified as a member or eligible member of a federally recognized Indian tribe or nation, and their safety or health is endangered.
You know what was interesting on that note is that it wasn't just women that were going missing. There's a lot of young men that were too. And in that story that I was talking about, it said that young men were often being trafficked as well as young women.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. 'Cause usually we always think of trafficking as women.
Yeah.
But I guess even in the Diddy case, the trafficking was actually technically men.
It was men and women.
Yeah, it was the male escorts. Were there women too?
Well, it was the women that he was forcing to do the things, and the escorts, I think, were mostly men.
Got
Well, he
you.
had
Yeah.
men victims too that weren't escorts, right?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't
there?
remember that either.
There could have been.
I thought
There could
Kid
be.
Cudi testified. Am I wrong?
Well, he only blew up his car.
Oh, I didn't know. Sorry.
That was it.
Wasn't he the one, though, that Diddy also got mad at him because he started dating Cassie?
Yeah.
And
That's why he blew up his car.
yeah, but no, Diddy went into his house on Christmas morning in the middle of the night, really early, and opened all the presents in the house and left them.
That is diabolical.
I mean, could you
What?
imagine if you had kids who were coming down, Santa's here,
Someone did all the work for us.
somebody opened it already?
Could you imagine walking in on Diddy doing that in the middle of the night? That's terrifying.
Covering everything in baby oil.
I don't want to hear that.
Just sadistic.
We're going down a
What
rabbit hole
is
here.
happening here? Christina,
It wasn't me.
This didn't happen before you. No, I'm just joking. We love having you on. Okay, what else do we need to touch on? I mean, I guess my main focus was bringing more awareness and then just talking about what could potentially be done. Obviously, you're a prosecutor, so we lean on you heavily for solving all the world's problems, Myrene.
Yeah, that's me, problem solver.
Fix this issue. So, but genuinely, like it's really it's a very serious issue, and they have not been able to come up with a solution that seems to be working very well. Like, is it just a lack of care? Is it a lack of funding? I saw that some sites said that they thought it was only going to get worse because of some of the federal tax cuts that have happened, under the Trump administration. So, I mean, does this just continue to get worse than just swept under the rug, just lost in the sea of everything else, or?
I think it probably will continue to get worse if there's cuts. The cuts could go to law enforcement. The cuts could go to other safety measures. I think awareness campaigns could really help a lot, making sure that people know, if you're trusting, that's wonderful, but don't get in a car with somebody else. Don't hitchhike, right? Because that was one of the biggest things that people talked about was hitchhiking. Or if there are substance abuse issues, I think there are a lot of programs out there now that focus on that to try to prevent young men and women from falling into that unfortunate path where things might happen to them.
So no clear solution, Myrene? You were supposed to...
John, I don't have a crystal ball, and if I
This
did,
is-
there'd be a whole lot of things solved, including, what are the lottery numbers for next week. But
I feel like awareness and
Priorities.
people in power, like caring about it more, you know what I mean? It being more of a priority for people who can actually like change laws and make tribal officers able to actually hold people accountable when they come on the reservation and kidnap and traffic and murder their women, daughters, people, men, all of them.
Well, that's one of the things I do like about how Michigan handles it. Like I said earlier, the tribal officers can be cross-deputized, and that can help a lot. If you do have something you need to solve right now, rather than just detaining them, you can arrest. And in the county I worked in before, we had tribal police, and they were cross-deputized, and the prosecutor's office would handle a majority of things coming in and around that casino: larceny in a building, drunk driving, domestic violence. And there were only some of those crimes that went federally, depending on the federal availability of a prosecutor and what types of charges they could do. But for maybe some of the misdemeanor type levels, those things went through local prosecutors. And I don't know if all local prosecutors agree to that or don't agree to that. It could depend on funding for them, too.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more resources then. I feel like there should be genuinely almost unlimited resources. One, percentage-wise, Native and Indigenous people make up a super small percentage. But two, just the historical wrongs that, have happened to these communities, genocide, theft of land, you know, you name it, those two things alone are like bad enough. I feel like they should just be absolutely taken care of in every way possible. It's like, how do you pay people back for, sorry, we murdered millions of your people and we took all of your land, and then we're also going to let you guys just suffer and allow, you know, thousands of people to go missing, and for these cases to never be solved ever, and for very few of them to be taken seriously. It seems ridiculous to me.
It's horrible.
Yeah, I think it is. I think some federal dollars are going forward now that it's a little more in the media. Like in that documentary, there's a federal FBI agent, but it's one guy who's trying to look into all of these murders.
Right.
And he had so many cases on his docket, and he's trying, but unfortunately, unless you get a new tip, there's not a lot you can do unless you have new evidence or something else. And in a lot of those cases, you know, not only are they missing, but bodies weren't located. So you don't know if they were taken and sold into human trafficking or something else, and that can be really hard to try to track down.
Yeah. Is that 40% number that we had talked about at the beginning of the podcast? That has to just be is that human trafficking survivors? Is that people that they know of? Is that 40% that they think are currently like actively being human trafficked? Like, how would you know specifically? You know, it's such a hard number to nail down, because it's not like, you know, okay, well, hi, we're criminals. You know, these are the people that we're human trafficking. You're like, it's something that's done very secretly.
I think they probably take the total number of known survivors from human trafficking and then find what the percentage is for Indigenous or other types of cultures or races or whatever.
Gotcha.
So they have to do it that way. Otherwise, I mean, the
How
number
would you
could
know?
be
So
infinite.
it could be way more.
Yeah.
It is way more. It's more than we think it is. For sure. Human trafficking
absolutely.
has to be more than we think it is.
It's unfortunate, but I do think it's really high.
Yeah.
I wish I had a way to solve all of that and solve every crime. That would be great.
I have a way.
How's that?
If you get caught human trafficking people, you die.
Well, you need to get the legislator to change the death penalty in Michigan because, we don't have one here.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there should be death penalty for people who abuse children, die, and then
Pedophiles and human traffickers. I think that's very valid.
You know the difference. If you commit that crime on tribal land, that's federal law. Federal law does have the death penalty.
Okay.
So
even if it was in Michigan?
If there's federal land.
And all tribal land is considered federal land? We have plenty of that in Michigan.
Right. So, but they have to commit the crimes on tribal land, not take somebody necessarily from it. Now, there are some laws where if you start a crime in one area, for example, if you start a crime in Ingham County and you go into Eaton County, what we would say is jurisdiction is proper in either place. And so maybe that might fall into being for federal things too. If you kidnap somebody from federal land, but you kill them somewhere else, maybe. Or if the body's found on tribal land, federal land, but you did it somewhere else, maybe there's that crossover.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just trying to think, like, how else do you get it across to people? Like, don't do that. Like, don't traffic people.
Well,
don't kidnap people. Don't drug people.
I do think, though, we're kind of joking a little bit about penalties, but I do think the penalties should be increased. Because one of the things you look for in sentencing is to deter others from doing it again. Mm-hmm. And if somebody gets a slap on the wrist, it's not going to deter them. They're going to be like, well, I'll just do it again. Yeah. It's a misdemeanor. I don't care.
But for those specific things, like someone goes to Meijer because they're hungry and steal something, yeah, you shouldn't steal. I get that. But I don't think that's a serious crime.
Well, I'm not talking about increasing that kind of crime.
I know. I'm just saying, just generally. Like, I'm not talking about, yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about increasing it like across the board, but for specific things, like.
I think specific felonies like child sexually abusive material, yes. i.e. child porn, criminal sexual conduct, human trafficking, kidnapping, that kind of stuff. All should be included. And you know what else? If I could write the laws, domestic violence laws should be increased as well.
Are they pretty weak?
Well, they can be. So if you commit a first offense domestic violence in Michigan, it's up to 93 days in jail and or a fine of $500. First offense. Second offense is still a misdemeanor, but it goes up to a maximum of 1 year. You only get to a felony if you have 2 priors, and that becomes only a 5-year offense. And then from there, if you actually strangle someone to the point where they cannot breathe or they're about to pass out, or you're suffocating them, then that can become a 10-year felony. But even that isn't that high, because when I'm saying 10-year or I'm saying 93 days or 1 year, doesn't mean they're going to get that maximum amount. It's up to that amount. And we go back to that whole thing of the sentencing guidelines in Michigan, and those can be a lot of different things. I had a strangulation case recently where it was really bad. This man had strangled his wife while she was breastfeeding their child, and she started to pass out. She said she couldn't breathe, she couldn't see, she felt herself going limp. And oftentimes in those cases, you lose control of your bodily functions, so she actually urinated herself. Came to, was about to drop the baby, didn't drop the baby, and the guidelines when we scored them, and I score them as high as I can, was 0 to 17 months. What that means is the person's only going to get local time on that 10-year. They're only going to go to the local county jail for up to 12 months.
For choking out his wife.
Yes.
Yikes.
And so those laws, in my opinion, need to be increased. You know, if you have, and this is one that's always stuck with me that irritates me. I'm sorry to go on a tangent, but if you abuse an animal, which I am not for, by the way, I don't want anyone to think I think animals should be abused, but if you abuse or torture an animal, that's a 4-year felony. If you abuse or torture your spouse and there's no aggravated injuries, it's a 93-day misdemeanor.
That's crazy.
That is
Although
crazy.
I agree with the animal
But that's
thing.
a good analogy.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, no, me too. But I think women should be right up there with that, or
Right,
spouses
right.
or
Of
partners.
course,
They should be
yeah.
right up there with that.
Jeez,
Absolutely.
that is wild.
Right.
That is wild. I've never heard that statistic. And
So, if the legislator, would let me rewrite these things, it would be great.
well, don't worry. We're gonna have a legislator on for our next episodes.
Oh,
Wait, not our next 2 episodes, but after that, a member of the legislature would like to come on and be a guest host,
Okay.
and we can hit her with all these questions.
Not
She's
everyone
gonna
has
love
to be
it.
a host. You're just giving this away to anybody now.
A guest host.
A guest is fine.
A guest host.
A guest.
Hey, everyone's a host. If you sit at the table
Oh.
and talk, you're a host. So I'm just saying guest
Okay.
host. I don't know.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong. But to bring this back full circle, and then wrap up, it was like 84%, right, of women, Indigenous women, experience violence, like physical violence, like at one point in their life. So is that one of the reasons you think that they put themselves in these situations that could lead to them going missing or being murdered or whatever it may be, is because they're trying to escape these violent situations? I mean, 84%?
It could be that they're trying to escape it, but it could also be a circumstance. That's what they grew up in. That's what they know. So if they saw their parent, and usually it is the male, not always, but about 80% of the time in domestic violence cases, it is the male partner.
80%?
80%.
Wow.
Nationally.
Yeah.
But if they see that happening, then they may believe that's how they should be treated, and they find themselves in that cycle of abuse. Or the flip side is that's how they think they should treat their partner, and they become the abuser. So really breaking that cycle of domestic violence will go a long way to stopping some of these things, but we need to do that by swifter and harsher penalties for those who are convicted, and making sure we have awareness campaigns that talk about this, and making sure there are services out there where these people can go.
And making sure that we're funding the services that provide the sorts of necessary treatment and therapy that children need that have been abused, so they don't grow up and
That's a big
perpetuate
piece, because
this.
unfortunately in Michigan right now, there's a lack of adolescent therapists for children, whether they're physically abused or sexually abused, or they have other issues like eating disorders or other types of things. There's a waiting list. Imagine you're a child who needs to deal with these things, and you're on a waiting list. You don't know how to deal with that. You're not equipped. You're a kid.
Massive waiting list.
Massive waiting list, months
Yeah.
and months at a time,
Yeah.
sometimes longer.
Yeah. So not only do we need a ton of money, we need people going into these fields.
So we need to really, really harp on that at colleges, saying that this is the type of thing you need to go into. There is a shortage. For a long time there was a teacher shortage, and so there were massive campaigns about that. There were nursing shortages, massive campaigns about that. I think there needs to be a campaign for therapists for adolescents.
Okay, I think that's a good. Well, anything else we want to touch on, real quick? And I know that seems like it diverged a lot from our conversation about missing Native and Indigenous women, but it kind of
all ties in.
It really does tie in.
I think it ties in when you're looking at all of the factors for domestic violence and how that plays in, and it can affect anyone across the board. And unfortunately, it seems to affect that specific area more.
Yeah. So if you have more information to share, or if we overlooked a specific fact or statistic that you'd like to highlight,
or someone that's missing you'd like to
raise
awareness for,
exactly, reach out to us. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Behind the Verdict, BTV_pod.
Let us know if there are other cases you want to talk about, and we'd be happy to make sure we focus on them as well.
You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.